really motivated you to leave, and what's motivating them to sell what they sell, and why are they doing this? Like, why can't they just say no? Like, what are your thoughts? You were in the middle of this, so I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. And for me personally, when I first started General Mills, I was very excited. Totally was drinking not Kool-Aid, that's a different company, but let's say I was totally eating the Cheerios and buying everything they were selling. I mean, when you think about the scale of some of these big food companies, they can really create huge amounts of change, and change isn't always a positive thing, right? It can have negative effects as well. And so I really bought into that. Like I had a passion for food, a passion for feeding people with affordable food options, which is kind of the drumbeat of a big food company is like, we're feeding America. We feed, a third of the population eats this product. You have multi-billion dollar brands. And there's a lot of pride, right? I mean, there's a lot of pride in feeding people. Um, but I think what happens, and I think tying it back to the Kellogg's brothers story, is like when your intention shifts from helping people to growing your business, which we all kind of wrestle with to some degree, right? And that's been kind of something I've had to unlearn in terms of just like Lovebird is about making the best possible product or cereal for people without any of the cheat codes that a big food company would use. But it's really easy just to go through your margin structure and be like, oh, I want to swap out this ingredient with that ingredient, or honey's really expensive. Why don't we just use natural flavors? It actually tastes probably more like
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote honey, or smells like honey, than you would. And you'd have to use a lot of honey to get that honey flavor through in the product. And so I think it's that shift of the intent goes from how do we make the best thing for people to eat and serve their families, to how do we grow market share and how do we grow our business and how do we do it profitably. And so I think what happens within that is you start viewing people not as people, not like you're inviting someone over to your house for dinner or for breakfast, but you view them as a number, right? It's like, how do I get this person to buy my product and buy more of it and buy more of it and buy more of it and not buy those other products? And I think what happens is you chase the lowest common denominator, which is like high carb, high sugar food products that are almost impossible to say no to. You can't just have one bowl of frosted flakes or Cocoa Puffs or something like that. And I wouldn't say it's like some like evil scientist in a lab.
Yeah.
It's like what at General Mills it's called consumer first, but that's essentially like, do you like the way it tastes? And it's like a linear relationship between product
Mm-hmm.
liking and sugar content. There is a
Mm-hmm.
cliff if you have too much sugar, but for kids there really can't be a thing of as too much sugar. For adults, that cliff gets a little bit lower, and anybody who's tried to drink Sunny D or any of these like
Mm-hmm.
very sugary things as an adult, you're like, how did I ever eat this? Right? It just doesn't add
Mm-hmm.
up. And so, like, I mean, I think there's a ton of great, smart people that work at these big food companies. And I think they do help provide food to America and feed them. But it's also sort of a like post World War II mindset of like, there is food scarcity in America, but that's more so for lack of grocery stores in certain areas than it is like access to like packaged food. Like it's easier to get a bag of potato chips for someone in a more urban community without a grocery store than it is to get like a banana. And
Mm-hmm.
so that mindset I feel is outdated. And then as I started my health journey and understanding the power of food as medicine and just not satiety, that's when kind of the switch flipped for me. And, I tried to do some things within a bigger company and launch some interesting items that were more ingredient forward. But then it became apparent that I wanted to create my own brand, my own mission, my own purpose, and really enact change that way. Because quite frankly, change does not happen from like a big company, right? Like in terms of like
Mm-hmm.
really rebellious, disruptive change, it just does not happen. Like they can make sustainability pledges and do this and that, and whether or not it's half-hearted or full-hearted, nobody will ever know. Uh, But like true disruptive change like happens on the ground. It happens with individuals. It happens with people who make a decision that like they want that change. Because it's very hard within a big company to say, hey, I want to create a product that's going to take away from our cash cow, that makes us a ton of money, is $1 billion plus, is global. But you know, I want to disrupt that. I don't think many people would make that decision in
Yeah.
all fairness, right? Like you have
No, for sure. I mean, it's harder to change once you have something like that than to start something and know your purpose and start right out of the gate in what your mission is. It's definitely hard to change a conglomerate of that
for sure. I
beast.
mean,
I mean, I also think it's interesting when you're talking about the consumers, putting consumers first, and it is true. It's like, how does it taste, right?
yeah,
Like you have to win on taste. Taste wins. But then the question that I'm thinking as you were talking about it is how does that product make you feel? How does it make you feel during and afterwards, right? Like that's kind of the root of food, right? Food as medicine, food as a healing agent. Yet we've been so concentrated on how does it taste? How does in that moment make you feel? I'm eating a bowl of ice cream. It makes me happy, right?
mm-hmm.
Oh, but like an hour later, I'm doubled over because I'm in so much pain, right?
Yeah,
So it's kind of the same thing when you're eating a bowl of cereal. We've all eaten multiple bowls of cereals at the same sitting over our lifetime, right? And for the most part, like for me, I can't eat dairy and I can't eat gluten. And I did back then, and it made me feel wretched.
mm-hmm.
So it's like, how does it taste? It tastes awesome. Of course it tastes awesome.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're going for. And that's clearly not why you started Lovebird, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about your journey to tasting great and making you feel good, because that's what your cereal does for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think to build on what you were saying, right? Like the chasing taste is kind of a race to a bottom, and that's how you get kids thinking that grapes should taste like a Jolly Rancher and not like an actual grape, right? Like the mere definition of flavor gets contorted in a way or distorted in a way that is almost unrecognizable from like the actual natural source. And so I think that's like the hard battle I have as a parent with, you know, now my close to 4-year-old who's like starting to be introduced to certain foods where I'm just like, how am I going to compete with like flavor blasted goldfish? Like like the fact
just
that
wait
called
until they
flavor
get
blasted,
older. Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
and again, like as a kid, I wasn't on a health journey as a kid, right? I didn't really know much about health. I don't think I even knew what an avocado was until like college. Like it was just like different growing up in the Midwest. And so for Lovebird, I mean, it's a very interesting question. And for me, I just firmly believe that like food from the earth is good for you and can taste good. You know, it's very hard to go toe to toe with like fruity pebbles or something because it's such an intense flavor. But I think that there is the potential, and I think you can actually reset your taste buds in like 10 days and kind of detox from all of these like ultra processed, high intensity flavor items because your body.
That's fascinating. 10 days, really.
Yeah,
That's all
and
that's
primarily
all
with
it
like
takes.
sugar, right? Like the sugars and everything, but a lot of the sugar comes with like high potency flavors, whether they're artificial or natural flavors, and sweeteners from sucralose to stevia and things like that. But with Lovebird, the idea was really just like literally take ingredients that someone would have in their pantry and make a cereal out of it. And that's cassava root, which is a root vegetable, rich in prebiotic fiber, and then also just honey, some coconut flour, and making those taste good. I mean, honey is amazing. I love honey. I use it all the time. You know, Lovebird uses honey as its sole sweetener with a little coconut sugar. It costs more, but I also feel like real food is real good for you and better for you than some of these processed things because after time, like your body like tastes sweet, it expects to receive glucose or fructose, and if it doesn't, it's going to keep hitting the more button, and that's what a lot of these products will lead to overeating because you're not really satiating that need, that biological need for sweet that your brain is sending a signal to your stomach or vice versa for what it needs. And so for me in Lovebird, it just simple ingredients, completely allergen friendly. So anybody, if you're have a allergen list like I do or you do can eat it and enjoy it. I want it to be inclusive for everybody. And it's been amazing to see, and I'm sure you have as well with your products too, just getting these letters from families that are like, hey, I have literally could not have eaten this product or that product without yours existing in the world. And that to me means a lot and kind of helps me continue on and move forward because it is making a difference. And then if you ladder it all the way up to the food and how it's grown and how it's harvested, I purposely selected a cassava supplier that is small family farms in Nicaragua. There's no industrial farming practices that you'll see a lot around the world. And as a result, it's the cleanest form of cassava you can have on the market. One of the few I have found that meets Prop 65 compliance guidelines. And so it just, for me, it's just like, it's taking it seriously. And if I draw it back to the analogy of like, if Big Food invited you over for dinner, right? They're going to cook you spaghetti. They're going to cut the noodles in half and serve you half of the noodle. Or pasta. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's my Midwestern background calling them noodles. But cut the pasta in half, water down the tomato sauce, and then serve you a half portion and probably sprinkle some sugar on top. But when I want someone to eat Lovebird, I want them to feel the love that went into it. And it's something I feed myself and my family. And there's absolutely no corners cut. You're going to get the best quality ingredients possible to make Lovebird happen. So it's been a very rewarding, a very challenging journey with plenty of stories in between. But that's my marching order. And I put all my ingredients on the front of the box. So that holds me extremely accountable because if I change an ingredient, I have to change the front of the box. And so I do everything in my power to make sure that it has the best ingredients possible in that box for whoever buys it.
Well, tell us a little bit about your autoimmune wake-up call, because I think a lot of the ingredients that you're choosing to source ties into that, right? So what was that like for you, and why do you choose outside of, clearly, I know a lot about the ingredients that you're using, but for our listeners who may not, there's a big difference between the ties to autoimmune and grain-free versus gluten-free versus, gluten. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think that clearly had an impact on how you're moving forward with Lovebird.
Yeah, I mean, autoimmune disease, for those of you or whoever's listening who have it kind of know a little bit more about it, but I would explain it as just like a lot of people are walking around with chronic inflammation and just don't know it. And sometimes these symptoms manifest as like itchy skin or pain in your joints or brain fog or fatigue. For me, it was kind of like all of the above. And for probably about 2 or 3 years, I didn't know what was going on. So I started to experiment with diets, and I think I started like gluten-free and then eventually wound up on Whole30. And then it wasn't really until I started learning more about food that I realized how big of an impact and role it can have on you. I think the first time I did Whole30, I felt like amazing, but there's still something kind of off. And then I was introduced to the autoimmune protocol diet, which is a subset of paleo, which essentially removes all the inflammatory ingredients that people have reactions to out of your diet. It's an elimination diet, so it's not something, unless that's all that works for you, but it's meant to kind of reset your baseline, and then you slowly reintroduce foods back to figure out what works for your body, because everybody's body is different and has different needs, different reactions. And it's this kind of journey to discover what works for you, because what works for your neighbor won't work for you. What works for your coworker might not work for you. And so it's a personal journey to figure out what your body responds to positively or negatively. And so while I was on that journey, I discovered like these different ingredients, and then I had the idea to really apply the principles of the autoimmune protocol diet to convenience food and essentially create the cleanest, least inflammatory food you could possibly have that could be enjoyed by a lot of different people.